Today I am going to explain an adventure movie called Kong Skull Island. Spoilers ahead, watch out and enjoy. Lieutenant Hank Marlowe's plane crashes in 1944, somewhere over the South Pacific, and he parachuted to the ground and landed on an island. Gunpei Ikari, another soldier, lands. Ikari sees Marlowe draw his rifle, and he fires, missing. Ikari pulls out a revolver and pursues Marlowe. They flee into the woods and engage in combat as they approach a cliff. Ikari almost stabs Marlowe in the back with his sword, but Marlowe deflects it. Marlowe is then on the ground with Ikari, who nearly kills him before a huge ape hand descends. The ape then appears to be rising over the two guys. He goes by Kong. 1973, Bill Randa, a representative of the government, and Houston Brooks, a geologist, travel to Washington, D.C., to meet with Senator Willis in order to get money for an expedition to the recently discovered Skull Island. Willis isn't all that excited about the concept, but Randa prods him into giving in. Randa informs Willis that he would also like a military escort before departing. On the last day before they can finally return home, the Sky Devil Squadron has gathered. They are led by Colonel Preston Packard and comprise Captain Earl Cole, Slivko, Rells, Glenn Mills, and Packard's right-hand man, Jack Chapman. When the call for the expedition comes through, Packard happily accepts the position. In a bar, Randa and Brooks locate James Conrad, a former British Special Air Service commander, who agrees to serve as their tracker. Two customers at the bar attack Conrad and startle him, but Conrad is able to control the men with ease. He sits down with Brooks and Randa to hear their strategy. Conrad wants more money than what is being given and warns that they stand a good probability of dying on the trip due to dangerous weather or carnivorous animals. Mason Weaver, an anti-war photographer, is developing some of her photographs inside a darkroom. She gets a call to join the expedition and she arrives at the base to meet with Packard and his men, plus a team of scientists from the company Landsat, including Brooks' fellow geologist Sandlin /Sand Landsat employees Victor Nieves and Steve. Weaver has reservations about the mission and thinks the military is planning something bad. The objective and what they expect to uncover on Skull Island are described by Brooks. Before using helicopters to reach the island, the team takes a ship into the water. They must pass through the island's surrounding lightning-producing clouds. The choppers fly across the region once they have passed through it. While the soldiers start dropping seismic charges into the ground, causing explosions, Weaver snaps a few shots. Soon after, one of the helicopters is struck by a tree that is propelled through it, sending it tumbling to the ground. The group suddenly notices Kong looming large above them. He then grabs a few more and slams them into the ground after putting another tree through a chopper. When the crew hits the ground, the survivors are split apart. Packard looks up at Kong as flames shoot from the wreckage of the choppers, and Kong turns to face him from below. At point-blank range, Packard confronts Randa and demands to know what actually led them there. Randa acknowledges that he had been trying to find evidence for his organization, Monarch, and that he had known for some time about the existence of monsters like Kong. While Randa, Packard, Mills, Cole, and other soldiers head out to search for Chapman since he is armed with enough ammo that Packard plans to use against Kong, Conrad, Weaver, Brooks, Lynn, Slivko, and Nieves are grouped together. One of the troops had a huge spider leg go down his throat as they move through the woodland. A huge spider is certainly above them and it begins to attack. The webbing lifts Mills up, and the other troops begin amputating their legs. Mills releases himself, and Packard kills the spider with a gun. Near a river, Chapman is all by himself. He observes Kong crossing the river to attend to a wound he received from the firing of the choppers. Kong takes a drink from the river before discovering a massive octopus. He tangles with it, grabbing its legs, then begins to devour it. The octopus carcass is then dragged away by him. A native tribe has cornered Conrad's troop. An older Marlowe emerges as they make an effort to defend themselves. He reassures both sides that they won't hurt one another before inviting them through the barricade. Marlowe informs the party that he has lived there for the past 28 years and has gained extensive knowledge about the locals and the island. They revere Kong as a deity because he has protected them from both Kong's own family and the beasts that live beneath the soil and have been wiping off the indigenous for generations. They are known as skull crawlers by Marlowe. They remained underneath until they were awakened by the seismic charge blasts. The skull crawlers triumph if anything should happen to Kong. Chapman strolls through the woods before settling on a log. It turns out that the log is a monster. Chapman fires at it, but the animal does not strike back. Chapman is murdered by a skull crawler as the animal flees. Conrad informs Marlowe that they intend to reach the island's north shore in 3 days so that they can be rescued. Marlowe promises to lead them in the right direction because he claims it cannot be accomplished on foot in 3 days. He says goodbye to the locals before boarding a boat with the crew. Nieves gets picked up by carnivorous birds and torn apart in midair shortly after leaving on her horse. Weaver notices a large water buffalo trapped beneath a downed helicopter as they travel. She tries to hoist it up to release the buffalo, but Kong appears and removes the helicopter. He gives Weaver a brief downward gaze, and she shows more wonder at him than fear. The Forbidden Zone, a previous battleground between Kong's ancestors and the skull crawlers, is where Marlowe leads the troop. In the field are the massive remains of Kong's family. When a skull crawler approaches, the group is forced to hide. Conrad notes that the skull crawler then spits out Chapman's skull and dog tags. Packard and his troops travel in the same general direction. A skull crawler snatches Randa while she is taking pictures and eats Randa. As it begins to strike and draw victims in with its tongue, another beast appears. The gangs then face off against a wave of carnivorous birds and the skull crawlers. Before giving it to Conrad, Marlowe draws the sword that belonged to Ikari and slashes the birds. One is put to death by Weaver by dropping a lighter into a hole, which releases gases that are ignited and set the beast ablaze. Following the altercation, the groups get together as Packard is still committed to finding Chapman. To prove Packard Chapman's demise, Conrad displays his dog tags. Nevertheless, despite the protests of Marlowe, Conrad, and Weaver, Packard wants to search for Chapman's ammunition cache so that they can kill Kong because he is determined to exact retribution for the deaths of his men. Packard gathers explosives that evening and sets up a trap for Kong. Weaver approaches the beast warily while Conrad and Weaver come across him in the meantime. He is kind as she gently touches his face. Kong catches fire as a result of Packard luring Kong near him and lighting the gasoline by the water. Before collapsing, Kong stomps on Steve and murders another man in the commotion. Then, as Packard prepares to detonate some explosives, Conrad and Weaver work to stop him. The other soldiers are persuaded that Kong is necessary in order to keep the skull crawlers out. Packard continues to be obstinate as the soldiers turn on him. The biggest skull crawler suddenly emerges from the ground, causing the group to flee. To set off the explosives, Packard stays behind, but Kong punches him in the face. The main skull crawler then pursues the survivors as they make their way to the shore. Cole stays behind to detonate 2 grenades in an effort to sacrifice it. Cole is tail-whipped into a wall by the monster, but he still blows up. Until Kong reappears and slams into the beast, the skull crawler is moving toward the group. Weaver fires a flare gun at the skull crawler, striking it in the face. Weaver is unintentionally thrown into the river as Kong grabs the skull crawler and throws him against the wall. Kong removes Weaver while continuing to battle the skull crawler. He punches the beast in the throat and extracts its insides. Weaver is then set down next to Conrad by Kong before he departs. The survivors leave on the boat shortly after, and 3 helicopters arrive to pick them up. Kong keeps an eye out in the distance to continue guarding his domain. He roars while pounding his fist. As the titles roll, we see footage of Marlowe finally making his way back to Chicago, where he finally meets his adult son and is reunited with his wife. After that, he settles in to watch a Cubs game. After the credits, Monarch is holding Conrad and Weaver in a questioning space. Brooks and Lynn enter the space, and Lynn informs the two that there are other monsters in the world besides humans and that Kong was not the only one. Before turning on a slideshow, Brooks takes a few documents out of his bag, among them a map of Tokyo. The slides depict a different team discovering cave paintings of Mothra and other monsters. Emperor Ghidorah. Rodan. Godzilla, of course. The combined roars of Godzilla and Kong are the final sound we hear.